super excited to host Katia Unlu, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Boll Branch and a former executive from Birchbox and Macy's. She has been in the D2C industry for over 10 years. Oh my gosh, has it already been 10 years? Leading the commercial side of the business at a variety of really exciting high growth companies, including Birchbox and obviously Boll Branch. During the last decade, she has established, overseen, and managed I'm going to say a ton of different functions and teams, to be honest, like so many, even just at Birchbox, so many teams that include everything from marketing, digital product, finance, planning, and analytics. So there's a ton in there. So again, she's currently Chief Digital Officer at Boll Branch, where she is responsible for driving growth and revenue for the overall business. There, she also manages marketing, business development, overall e-commerce, customer operations, and analytics. So I am super excited to have Katia join us and share her experience and learnings from working and leading teams in large e-commerce companies and getting her thoughts on some of the future trends and challenges of e-commerce. And Katia, thank you so much for joining. And obviously, you are a very dear friend of mine, and we worked together at Birchbox for many years together. So I am super excited to have you as sort of our first speaker. And so I would love to we'll make this like a fireside chat, and I'd love to just ask you some questions and just get your thoughts and just to give you some context. So in terms of the audience, so primarily, thinking about people, obviously they're running e-commerce companies, whether from like the operations, the finance and accounting side of things. And so because you've sort of seen it all, I think your perspective is going to be super helpful. And some of the businesses might just be starting off. Some of them are venture backed, some of them are bootstrapped, some of them are very large. So really just, again, given your breadth of experience, just so excited to jump right in. So maybe we can just
having me.
Yeah.
I'm
oh
so
my
excited.
gosh. Amazing. And so like, let's maybe just start with, again, we're talking to people at different stages of their careers. So, would love to get your thoughts and maybe just share a little bit more about your background of sort of, how did you get involved with all of those different teams? And if you had any advice, for people just starting out in e-commerce, trying to build their career, what would that be?
Yeah, definitely. So excited to be here, and so nice to kind of meet everyone. And I'm Lyndsey is a dear friend, so I'm always happy to offline spend more time with people. If anybody wants to pick my brain, I'm here and available also. But yeah, I mean, as Lyndsey said, I feel like that kind of makes me sound like a little bit all over the place. I've done so many different things, but I've really enjoyed it. And I think it's one of the things that's made me successful in e-com is having the ability to understand how all of these different functions work together by kind of having lived on all of these different teams and all of these different functions. And now being in the role that I'm in, it's so critical that I understand how all the different parts work together. So, I think if I had like one piece of advice, it's just being able, especially like earlier on in either your career or in the company's career, being able to be open to all opportunities. I think growth, both professionally and in the business, comes from so many different places these days. When I was, early on in my career, I thought that, just like everybody else does, right? Like career growth is very linear. You become a manager and then you become a senior manager and director, and that's how you get promoted. But it really is so lateral in a lot of different ways. So in my career, I was just very always open to different opportunities. I was never the person to kind of like shy away from taking on a project that somebody else technically is in someone else's area of responsibility, etc. And I think through those types of things, then when the opportunity arose, I was able to, either kind of lead or manage that team or be involved in different ways. So I think that to me is like one piece of advice, and I think that really also translates into business growth as well. in both Birchbox and Boll Branch, the most interesting and sometimes highest potential opportunities have come from a lot of different places, and they might not be like the things that we think as executives are going to be like the big revenue driving initiatives. And just being able to be open to different paths of growth. I think that's my advice.
I love that. And I do remember you doing all of those things at Birchbox. So, so 100% makes sense. And so as part of that, can you talk a little bit about sort of the team that you run today at Boll Branch? And, what is your advice really for running that team? And I'm not sure, I know you guys sometimes are remote, sometimes are in person. Like, how do you think about that? Maybe you don't think about it differently, and sort of how do you manage through that?
Yeah, definitely. Such a good question, given everything that's happened in the last 2 years with COVID and everything. So I manage now a total of 35 people at Boll Branch, comprised of what I'd call it like the marketing teams functions. So everything from acquisition to brand to social to retention, the whole kind of full funnel. I also oversee the e-com organization, meaning digital product, site merchandising, everything soup to nuts there, as well as customer operations, which I consider like an extremely actually important part of the overall mix as well, because that team provides us so much customer feedback and it's super important. And then analytics as well. So it's really, it's a lot of different areas, but I feel like you kind of need all of those pieces to be under one umbrella to make a great customer experience. So in terms of managing that size of team, it's been a really fun, challenging time to do that. We are dual headquartered, so we do have an office, although close. We have an office in New Jersey, in Summit, and then we have an office in Midtown, in New York, near where Lyndsey lives. And again, even though like the offices are pretty close to each other, it's still, we do have a good concentration of people that are primarily in the New York office and then primarily in the Summit office. And I feel like my like piece of advice for managing all of that is really just being able to stay connected to the team. So I try to have, in addition to kind of weekly check-ins with my direct reports and etc., I also try to have meetings with all of them so that they're all on the same page of kind of big goals, initiatives that we're swimming towards as a team, and they stay connected to each other. I also try to have monthly kind of overall total team meetings. So try to get all the 35 people together in one virtual, most of the time virtual room these days. To try to make sure, again, we're talking about the big themes and progress of things that we are working towards, and kind of have each team go through an update on initiatives and progress towards those. And then I do also try to have at least like monthly, or if I can, sometimes quarterly check-ins with every single person on the team. I just find it to be incredibly important and valuable to make sure that you are supporting the career growth of even, XYZ associate on your team. I think that like, I find those to be extremely valuable. And also, back to the first question around kind of business opportunities, I find that, people who are like the least objective, like a site merchandising associate, can have the best ideas in terms of driving growth, because they see the simplest things and you're like, wait, why aren't we doing that? So I find those to be super valuable.
That's amazing. And so you're really, even though some of the teams might seem like they have very different sort of areas of focus, like you're basically orienting them all around sort of like customer journey experience and then growth opportunities.
100%.
Awesome. All right. And then just to maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about, the e-commerce landscape, which has obviously changed a ton, even, since we were at Birchbox. Like, I guess, what has your experience been, especially with COVID and even pre-COVID? I think things were changing, and sort of what are some of the big trends that you're thinking about and focused on?
Yeah. Definitely. For me, everything, not to use like such a, I don't know, I feel like marketing term, but everything comes down to the customer. And I think that over the last couple of years, with everything that's happened with COVID, this has gotten even more increasingly more important. So because us as like e-com drivers, we have so much access to customer data, right? It's so much at the forefront of everything that we do, that e-com businesses have just traditionally been better at leveraging that data for everything that they do: performance marketing, making decisions around operations, right? Like how orders are being fulfilled, what you put in ship in packages, new versus repeat, right? All of those things. I think in general, I had this a meeting recently with a retailer who shall not be named, and I was reminded yet again of how slow some of those more traditional retailers are at just like understanding who their customer is, how they'll actually leverage that data to inform all of their decision making. And I think that this whole rise over the last decade that we've had of D2C players, with, you know, the Warby Parkers of the world, and, you know, even down to like pros, right? Like every single category at this point has been like disrupted by a D2C player. And I think that D2C brands just are so in tune with who their customer is, and that's what is like helps them then succeed, because they can be really targeted with their strategies around growing that customer base. So I think the other piece too, with that comes so much need for agility and change. That's the other piece too that I think is like such an important piece of success, especially in e-com land, but also in general.
Yeah.
Especially everything that's happened with COVID, I have found that is such an important piece. In all of my time at Birchbox and now at Boll, we make changes on real time, and real time can be hourly. It's not just like daily anymore, especially when it gets into holiday and high season, all those things. And that is, so having that agility and nimbleness is so important, both from, again, like how you're set up, team, everything. So when I think about hiring, and when I think about really a lot of decisions that I make, I really think about the type of profile of people that are that can, we used to have this term at Birchbox, GSD, get shit done, right?
Mhm.
And that's really the profile of people that I lead with in terms of hiring too.
Awesome. And one of the things that you mentioned, which I think is true for like a lot of our merchants today too, is like there's just so much data everywhere. How do you think, like, what is your advice to somebody too, as they're like, I have data in all of these systems? Like, how are you thinking about like bringing it together? Like, do you have any advice for somebody who, let's just say, is like, maybe they're just starting to think more deeply about like data analytics? Like, is there an area of focus that you recommend, or some sort of setup? Like, I guess what advice maybe would you give to somebody on that side?
Oh my God, it's so important. I think one of the best things, and like really what actually attracted me, I'll say, to Boll Branch in the first place, was that I had joined the brand when they were about 5 years old, but at that point they already had a data warehouse in place and data infrastructure in place. And I swear to you all that that was one of the things that actually attracted me to the business. I was like, wow, they really have their house in order, that they've thought about this so early on, because I just know and have seen the implications of having disorganized data, and what happens down the road, and how frustrating that experience can be. So to me, like having an organized data warehouse is so incredibly important in today's world. I think also when you think ahead to what's kind of happening on the performance marketing landscape, with cookies going away and basically the ability to have third-party tagging going away, all of those things, the landscape is changing so much that being able to have first-party data is going to become the most important critical piece of it all. So getting your house in order, having a CDP, right? One platform where you're collecting events, you're collecting everything in one place, and leveraging that to then push out to different systems, whether it be Facebook, whether it be et cetera, is going to just become incredibly more important. So to me, like that is the most important thing.
Amazing. And then you talked a little bit about, how you guys are thinking about, basically, changing and being adaptable to the customer. How do you think customer has behavior has changed maybe over the last several years, and how really?
Yeah, great question. I think, again, because I've been in primarily, I mean, a lot of e-commerce startup over the last couple of years, it's been really interesting to see just different cohort and how they've behaved. And I think the behavior has changed so much over COVID as well. Um, we see a ton of different segments within Boll Branch. And I think in a lot of ways, we're not as traditional D2C players out there because of the media mix that we have in place. So our consumer is a little bit older than your typical kind of D2C consumer. And that's actually been, I would say, a huge advantage for us with everything that's happened over the last 2 years with COVID. But again, it just underscores the importance of having your kind of data in order, because we've really been able to, segment and understand our different cohorts. So as an example, we have a very significant cohort of our customers that is a very luxury affluent consumer, and they really have not been affected by as much by what's happened out there with COVID and then inflation and recession fears and all of these things. So we really adapt our marketing strategy towards that. And we really segment and treat them differently. So they are, we've taken price increases and it hasn't impacted how these people shop and convert with us. We've been able to, we've allowed ourselves to have that luxury where I think in a lot of brands that might not have that luxury of affluent consumer, they might not have the liberty to take that, and they have to adapt their strategy to really who their customer is. So I think, again, just being able to really understand your customer and being able to understand the different cohorts, right? Because it's not a one size fits all consumer, and being able to just kind of stay ahead and understand what's happening in like the broader macro economy is so important.
Totally. Totally. And so Boll Branch, obviously online first, but then you are also thinking about like physical retail. How do you think about those two things? And because some people, right, take the perspective that physical retail, like they should be standalone profitable. Other people, right, we've seen take the view that like, oh, it's think about it more as like advertising dollars. Like, how do you guys approach sort of physical retail, and which one do you lead with, and when?
Yeah, great question. It's very much, I feel like, on everyone's radar these days. I think what we've learned over the past 2-3 years with the pandemic is that customers have really adapted their behavior to just engaging with brands wherever they want to on their own kind of terms. So I think that's going to be the trend going forward. So being able to be present where your customer is so incredibly important. So again, let's say if your customer is that luxury affluent consumer, a large portion of them still shop offline. So offline becomes is an important part of how you can reach that consumer. So for us, we definitely think about retail as an important growth trajectory for us. But we really are thinking about it in very specific kind of areas, right? Again, areas where we might already have awareness, where there isn't a lot of competition geographically for us, and thinking about strategically placing retail in those type of locations, where we can really take that awareness that we might have that's from all the marketing and media that we've done and converting it through a physical presence. Because again, we know that at least half of our customers are probably not going to engage, or half the people who are aware of us are not going to be able to engage with us in just a digital only way. So that's really how I think about kind of D2C going forward. I do think, like, again, who your customer is matters a ton. But I do think that there's been a permanent change in how like brands and customers interact throughout COVID. Like physical retail is not going away anytime soon. There's been such a resurgence in mall traffic. There's been such a resurgence in that over the last, let's say 12 months, really, since everyone got vaccinated and feels more comfortable going into those type of environments. But there's this permanent kind of underlying like change that's happened of customers being really in control of how they want to interact with the brand, that I think is going to continue to be the case.
Awesome. Awesome. And sort of maybe on a similar note as like physical retail. So whether it's like your own stores, how do you guys think about wholesale also? And sort of, again, like some people are like, oh, again, this is just another way, like some advertising. So even if it's break even, that makes sense. Other people, they're like, this is my whole business. And then sort of on top of that, and really just more generally to thinking about the different channels that you guys could potentially be selling on, whether it's like your own store, whether it's right the site, whether it is wholesale. And the other thing that we've seen, although I don't think you guys are doing this actively, but like for certain brands, like different online marketplaces too, like how do you sort of think about that mix? Like what does that look like? And then, and maybe also like how important is wholesale to you guys?
Yeah, definitely. For us, again, like for us specifically, that because again, a lot of our customers are still shop, like offline is a big portion of how they engage and shop. Wholesale does play a part in that. So at Boll Branch, we have an important standing relationship with Nordstrom, and we are exploring other places where, again, our customer shows up that we can see. So, you know, more traditional retailers like Bloomingdale's, et cetera, definitely thinking about all of those types of opportunities. I think with wholesale, it gets a little bit tricky because you as a brand want to be able to have some kind of ability to storytell in those types of environment. And I think it becomes really challenging, especially at these kind of bigger, more traditional retailers. So I think that's the tricky part about wholesale, because, you know, I think you and I have seen this with Birchbox and in many past lives. If you can't really kind of tell the story of your brand well, you're not going to ultimately get much revenue out of it, and it's just not going to be a very profitable business for you long term. So that piece is just so important. So when we think about partnerships with wholesalers, it's kind of that equation. It's like, is our customer there? And like, of course we want access to that, but we also, the storytelling and being able to really have the presence that we want to have there is an important part of the decision-making framework. So again, we're not going to go into a place where it's just kind of our product is kind of just like shoved on a shelf. Being able to, you know, have maybe a shop and shop develop that type of concept is really important. And then in terms of kind of, I would say like marketplace, etc., I'm always a little bit, again, I will take revenue and prioritize revenue over anything. I feel like that's important. But where you show up and having a little bit of that brand control, I feel like is again an important piece of the decision making, how we think about those things. I think also, again, how your data ends up being used, I think is an important piece too. So I think, again, like we as a brand at Boll Branch have shied away maybe from, you know, just being randomly included in like post-purchase upsell type card upsell opportunity, etc., as an example, because we're just a little bit like anxious around how that data will then get leveraged by other players. So again, it's really, it comes down to like what you feel comfortable as a brand, and making decisions that way.
Awesome. Awesome. And so maybe this next question, less relevant maybe for Boll Branch, sort of given the amazing and very high-end products that you guys are selling today, which by the way, I love. Thank you for sending me those. I think but maybe thinking back to when we sold, you know, $10 makeup subscription boxes. right?
Mhm.
So like, given, the current sort of uncertainty, around the economy, and people are like, oh, like, is it gonna slow? Plus, inflation is happening. Like, what advice would you give somebody, in terms of, thinking through that, how that impacts, their revenue strategy, their marketing strategy? Yeah, and I guess in a time of a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is just like how I always think about running a business. Not the same for everyone, but I feel like everything that's happened this year has led a lot of people to say you really have to be in charge of your own destiny. Meaning, like you have to run a business that's kind of somewhat self-funded and profitable, or at least have a plan of how you're going to get there in a near future. So again, that's I feel like a lot of the lessons that you and I have had over the last decade that we've been doing this. It's such an important piece, especially given the environment that we're in today. So again, when we think about different revenue strategies and tactics and marketing spend, it really, like, table stakes at this point is, thinking about first order profitable, and or at least like having a very clear path of how that's going to get there. So I would say, like, my first piece of advice is having at least a near-term plan on how you are going to be in charge of your own destiny, and what that means for you, both in terms of spend, operational expenses, etc. And then in terms of kind of like we're thinking about sourcing new revenue opportunities, I do think that, again, just being open to whatever form that might come, whatever like interesting new revenue stream. It might not be, I don't know, again, as like obvious as most people think. I think, again, some of the best ideas have been sourced from like an associate on the team or a customer, right? Again, I can't underline this enough. Like, we spend so much time just listening to customer feedback, whether that, again, it could be as simple as coming from our CX team and the engagements, the touch points that they have. One of the best examples I give is we started a virtual like design consultation business when it was COVID, of course, and all of that. But it was a way to drive. Really, we thought of it as like a service to the customer. We didn't even think that it was going to be a revenue driving opportunity. And now that business is going to be almost like 5% of the total, which like
Wow.
is like, again, like, it wasn't even supposed to be anything. We were like, how can we get our CX team like being leveraged, and how can we provide a service for the customer? And it now is turned into a full-fledged business, and we're really thinking about how we can use this as a capability, quite frankly, that we have, that especially in this category where you still really need to kind of like see the product.
Yeah.
So again, I just think like being able to be open to potential of where like new sources of revenue could come from.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's amazing. And it sort of goes to one of the things that I've been hearing a little bit more about is this idea of like social selling too. And it sounds like you guys are already doing that. And then Katia, are there any like special, and I know because you guys are on Shopify, also like tools or apps or things that have been really interesting for you and the team?
Yeah. I'll start with the first point, which is like around social selling. So again, I think that's something, again, you really have to think about who your customer is, right? I think that type of, and there's various forms of social selling,
Yeah.
right? There's live selling. There is like a lot of the interesting things that Instagram is doing, or selling directly on the platform. I think, again, depending on who your demo is, it could make a ton of sense for you. For us, we actually do a ton on Instagram through our influencers. So that's been a huge revenue stream for us. And again, I think that like at first you're kind of like, oh, maybe they're, you know, if you do have an older demographic, is that really going to work? But we've seen a ton of success with it. And just because, there might be a lot of younger people on that type of channel, there's still a ton of also older people on Instagram as well. So, and all you have to do is just do the math of like kind of how many people do I need and how many people ultimately will convert. So I do think that, again, for me, goes back to the customer and what you think might work there. But I think those are definitely like interesting opportunities. On the tools front, there's so many interesting things happening, from like kind of this hybrid of like, CX and retail kind of capabilities. So like, one vendor that I'm always impressed with, what they've been able to do is like Hero. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're kind of this, very interesting kind of, chat capability where anybody, whether they're in a retail location or part of your CX team, or really like anyone on the team, can kind of hop in and have an interaction with a customer. And they just give you the tools to be able to do that very seamlessly. So that's one that, I'm often like very impressed with, because again, in this world where the lines between P&Ls are getting like very blurred, and the customer is who really matters, being able to leverage a retail associate when they have some downtime, and get them plugged in talking to a customer. Again, we've seen a ton of success in doing that. So I think like those types of things are super interesting. On the Shopify front, we are Shopify backed. And I think, again, especially for a business, I can't say this enough, because I also manage the kind of like digital product side of things. Shopify for somebody starting out, I think is like a great path to go. And I would not overcomplicate things, because Shopify, again, gives you so many built-in, tools already and access to customer data that you don't even need to kind of like overcomplicate things. It's a really good base platform for all of those things in one place. And their access to kind of like third-party plugins is also pretty great, where again, you can pretty much, find a plugin for anything. A lot of brands, right, such as yourself, work with, Shopify, and just makes it really easy. But I think that, again, as businesses mature, we actually went, headless last year. So our front end is fully headless. We leveraged Nacelle as our kind of headless partner in that. We're still back end Shopify backed. So again, I think depending on kind of what your needs are as a business, for us, it was really important to have a more custom front end and being able to leverage, video on site and more kind of built out modules down the road around storytelling, et cetera. That was a big part of what we wanted to do. So going headless on the front end made sense for us. But again, I think leveraging Shopify as much as possible, especially in the early days, I can't recommend that enough.
Awesome. And then Katia, just for everybody that's listening, can you maybe just give a quick overview on like, what does that mean? Like, what does headless commerce mean? And sort of what were some of the reasons that you guys decided to move to that?
Yeah, definitely. So headless e-commerce just basically means that all of your, front end is pretty much custom, leveraging various like APIs and various tools, to kind of make a front end custom. So for us, like, again, the big reason for us, like why we ended up going that route, was we really wanted we found that at a certain point in our growth trajectory, Shopify was very limiting. The way that their collection pages are set up, the way that the entire customer journey, I should say, is set up is very, standardized and very limiting. So your homepage must look like this. You have, 5 modules and you can do that with them. Your collection pages look like this. They have, there's a hero bar at the top. There's, swatches of all the PDPs underneath. And a PDP looks like XYZ, and this is the add to bag button. And of course, again, you can work with Shopify to customize that. But we just got to a place where we were spending so much time customizing the look and feel that we thought that it was best for us to really take the front end part in-house. We weren't quite ready. We didn't have a full engineering team staff to fully in-house everything on the front end. We don't have a large engineering team. So somebody like a Nacelle actually was a good kind of in-between solution for us, because they do provide already some built-in integrations with other vendors. So it was kind of like an in-between without fully taking everything and doing everything custom in-house for us. Now, again, I would just say, especially for like the early startups, I feel like going headless sounds so interesting and like sexy these days. But like, just remember that it basically means you're taking the full front end piece in-house, and the engineering support that you will need to have is a lot. When you're Shopify backed, you might not, when AWS goes out, for example, you might not experience that at all because you're Shopify backed. But when you are headless, because one of the vendors that you're leveraging is on AWS, that will still impact you. So, I don't need to tell you guys horror stories, but I have many. Black Friday, 8 a.m.
Of course,
AWS
right?
had
Always.
one little outage.
Yeah.
And so like parts of our site worked. So because checkout for us is still through Shopify, checkout worked, but the entire front end, like the frames of the website loaded, but you couldn't actually click on the navigation.
Oh, no.
And navigate. Yeah. So like things like that are just like really fun. So again, I feel like it's just not a decision to be taken lightly. So I really encourage people to kind of like stick with Shopify, especially in the early days. I think headless will get more sophisticated and easier, and things will get worked out over time, but it is a very relatively new technology still out there. So my advice would be like, give it a few years, unless you have a really compelling need for why Shopify doesn't work for you anymore.
Got it. No, I think that's super helpful. It makes a ton of sense. And so maybe switching gears a little bit again. So obviously you have a very unique perspective, having also managed, right, like a finance and accounting team, in addition to data analytics, to sort of like the whole e-commerce operation. How do you think about, because a lot of our clients, right, like they're coming from the accounting and finance side, like what advice would you give them or their marketing teams on like how best to work together?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I mean, so fun facts for everyone. After Lyndsey left Birchbox, I pretty much also took on her role. And we were managing, in addition to managing the US, we actually managed other markets as well. So it was like definitely a fun finance and accounting operation. Just even like thinking about currencies and all of that, that was really
It's a lot. Yeah, that was
it was a lot. It was a lot. But I think that like one of the most important relationships that I developed in my career and then was responsible for was my relationship with the finance team. If the finance team is integrated into the organization, I feel that that's how organizations like work best. And I would also say that also about the data team as well. So being able to, have the finance team as part of like weekly performance reviews, or being able to have them really in the know of kind of everything that's going on. I find that that's where having that open communication, that's when I see the most success in businesses. If you have kind of a siloed finance or a siloed like data team, I find that's when kind of the issues occur, right? Because if there is a new initiative that a team is doing or working on, a new wholesale partner that we're onboarding, and if the finance team doesn't know about it, it's that we can just avoid so many things in the way vendors are set up, or so many questions down the road that could have been avoided up front if we had just involved that the members of the finance team ahead of time. I think the other piece too, with kind of, I in general like to hire people who are analytical also for all parts of my team. I think that's like really important. I think people need to not just kind of rely on the finance folks to do their revenue projections, to do their analysis, to do their kind of like thinking. I really do think finance team should have an overall like perspective on where the business needs to go to hit goals. But I also like ultimate goals for like outcome for this business, but I also really leave it to kind of like channel owners to figure out like how to actually get there. So I think that kind of dynamic is a healthy one to like encourage and have. And I do really encourage everyone on my team to hire and train people to be analytical themselves, so that you can have your own perspective on the numbers rather than just kind of like letting the finance team do that and run with that.
Yeah.
Does that help answer your question?
It does. And maybe even to ask it in a slightly different way too, is like, if I am on the accounting team or I'm on the finance team, like what advice would you give me for, for sort of stepping up, but also working and supporting the marketing team?
Yeah, just being able to be like incredibly integrated and ask a ton of questions. I think people are like, again, I feel like people can be like very siloed sometimes, but just like reaching out and be like, hey, in our company, all hands, what I'm making it up, right? In our company, all hands, I heard that you are this is something that you guys are thinking about. Like, I'm curious to like learn more about that. I feel like those types of things can again lead to actually one, bigger revenue driving initiatives, but also making it feel like much more integrated between all the different teams.
Yeah, totally. That makes a ton of sense. And maybe I'm part of that too. Like, what was one of the biggest challenges when you were running, strategy and finance and accounting and sort of all of those things?
Yes. Oh my God, so many things. Challenges. I feel like the one that like really was a fun one was the currency and being able to translate. I think like just being able to be like really adaptable. I think that was one of the biggest like challenges when I think back to also we had to spend a lot of time with our international folks, so we would go to France and really had to kind of adapt to their different like working styles and their culture and etc. And we always like took the approach of being really amenable and just like asking a ton of questions and trying to understand why they do things a different way. And again, like typically there is reasons for why people are doing things a certain way. So like we might have not agreed, being in the US and like being the HQ, if you will, we didn't necessarily agree with what they were doing, but kind of once we were able to understand, like fully appreciate the context, we're like, oh, that makes sense why you started this limited edition box, or why you started this like separate revenue stream that makes it like really painful for us to like account for. But I think just being able to like, again, have that open conversation and understanding the context and like the reasoning behind the strategy. I think once we were able to like really be like boots on the ground and understand that, I think that helped a ton.
Awesome. And sort of on some of those nuggets that you just talked about. So like selling in foreign currencies or like new payment methods, obviously what we're doing is we're trying to help merchants really on the marketing side. When you say, hey, like I want to sell in this currency, or I want to try buy now, pay later, or whatever that new payment process or method might be. Like, obviously we're trying to help companies automate that process on the back end, on the accounting side. How do you think about, whether it's new payment methods or new markets and new currencies, like how do you think about that from the marketing perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a ton of opportunity for D2C brands to expand internationally, again, where it makes sense. We at Boll Branch, we have a little bit of a wrinkle with like bed sizing and things like that makes it a
Oh my
little bit
gosh, yeah.
complicated. Just makes it a little complicated. But that doesn't actually, there's still tons of places, Canada, Mexico, that could make sense for us again in the near term, without having to like overhaul your entire operation to do it. But I think that it's an interesting like piece for everyone to consider. I think that what you guys are doing as a brand makes it so much more easier for brands to kind of get to their ultimate goals so much more seamlessly. So that's like amazing. I think again, like Shopify being Shopify makes it so easy to plug in different payment methods, different merchants. There's so many things that you can do now with try now, pay later. I feel like there's like between them and Klarna and a lot of other people, there's Affirm, right? There's
so many now. Yeah.
That you can now try. It's kind of crazy. We have found, again, for our type of customer who's a little bit older and more on to that kind of higher end affluent piece, those different types of payment methods are actually not as like kind of conversion driving as you think. But again, I think that for a younger demo, that's super important.
Yeah.
So being able to integrate that quickly, I think is huge.
Awesome. Well, Katia, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been absolutely lovely. We really, really appreciate it. And and I still owe you a coffee too. So I'm gonna have to schlep my way down to Tribeca.
Downtown. I know, it's so far away. I know.
Awesome. Oh, well, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it.
Like I said, I mean, I'm around, I'm available. Lyndsey can share my info. I'm happy to chat if I can be helpful to anybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katia.
Fine. All right.
Thanks to everybody that joined.